Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Achieving Net Zero in Alaska and Oregon. This webinar is being brought to you by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA. And in our webinar today, we will be featuring two of the winning programs of CESA's 2014 State Leadership in Clean Energy Awards. And before we get started, I'd like to go over a quick housekeeping slide. All of our participants today are in listen-only mode. You can tune into the audio portion of this webinar using your computer speakers or a headset, or you can call in using your telephone. And today we are encouraging all of our webinar participants to please type your questions into the question box on your webinar console. Type them in as you think of them. Don't wait until the end of the webinar to type your questions in. We will queue up all of your questions and answer them as time allows during a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So again, please type your questions in as you think of them. We'll queue them up and answer them at the end. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. You'll find a recording of this webinar and all of CESA's previous webinars archived on the CESA website on the address you see on your screen. That's cesa.org/webinars. And with that, I would like to introduce Todd Olinsky. Todd is a project director here at CESA, and he will be our host for today's webinar.
Thank you, Samantha. I want to welcome everybody to the webinar, Achieving Net Zero in Alaska and Oregon. You can go ahead and advance the slide, please. I just want to take a moment to introduce CESA. For those not familiar with the organization, we're a national nonprofit. CESA stands for Clean Energy States Alliance, and we work with states and folks in energy funds and who manage energy funds within the states to help them do what they do, which is to most efficiently and effectively support clean energy at the state level. Next slide, please. So among other things, every couple of years we give out these awards called State Leadership in Clean Energy, or SLICE awards, and we have a panel of independent judges that review state clean energy programs from among our member states and come up with a number that will get these awards. And so as part of our support for these state programs, we produce these webinars to let people know about these award-winning programs, which are really exceptional programs and examples of the type of state clean energy activity that could be emulated in other states. So with that, we will move right into introductions. Next slide, please. Today we are going to talk about two SLICE award-winning projects, one in Kodiak, Alaska, and we have folks here from the Alaska Energy Authority and the Kodiak Electric Association, and then the second award-winning program is the city of Gresham, Oregon's wastewater treatment plant project. Next slide, please. So we have folks here from the Energy Trust of Oregon and from the city of Gresham. And so we will introduce the speakers now. We will then go into the Alaska project first, then the Oregon project, and then following both presentations we will, well, not we, the speakers, will address your questions and comments. And so please type those into the box you see on your screen as they occur to you, and we will get to as many as we can at the end after the presentations are done. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's guest speakers. We have Sean Scaling, Program Development and Project Evaluation Director at the Alaska Energy Authority, and Darren Scott, President and CEO of the Kodiak Electric Association, speaking about the project in Kodiak, Alaska. Then we'll have Dave Muldahl, the Renewable Energy Project Manager at Energy Trust of Oregon, and Alan Johnston, the Senior Engineer at the Wastewater Services Division in the city of Gresham, Oregon, speaking about the Oregon project. So I think that we're ready to begin. Just to remind everybody, this is being recorded. It will be posted to our archive, and you will be able to review it later. And with that, I will introduce Sean Scaling and Darren Scott from Alaska.
Thanks, Todd. This is Sean Scaling. Good morning to everybody on the West Coast, and good afternoon to those on the East Coast. The sun has just risen here in Anchorage about 20 minutes ago, and so we're off to the beginning of a day, and I know it's the end of the day for those of you on the East Coast, so thanks for joining on Friday afternoon. So I'm going to just quickly go first through the state program, the Renewable Energy Fund, and then hand it over to Darren Scott to talk about the specific projects that were awarded. So first, the Renewable Energy Fund, let me get used to advancing and talking at the same time. I'm sorry, just a second. Okay, here we go. So first, just a little to ground everybody in Alaska. It's obviously a really large state, very low population. We have certain communities that are connected. A large majority of the population is connected, but there are hundreds of communities out there that are not connected. Diesel fuel is used for electricity generation in nearly all those communities. And the Renewable Energy Fund has been set up to help alleviate the costs of electricity and heat across the state. I mentioned here on this slide 190 communities are eligible for power cost equalization. It's a state program that helps equalize the cost of power across the state. And so that 190 means that those are high energy cost areas. And again, on the grounding of Alaska, this is just another map. You can see the little black lines are the interconnected road system. And there are power lines along some of that, basically the left part of the A that ends up in Fairbanks in the middle of the state down to Anchorage in the on the lower left part. Kodiak, which we'll be talking about, is the island that's down in the Gulf of Alaska. You can see a little wind turbine. I can point to it, I guess. I think you can see it. This is where we're talking about for the project. All the little dots on there are the PCE communities with high energy costs that are generally not connected to anything else by road or wire. And just one more slide on the cost of energy in Alaska. These are electric rates. It's a combination. Each line is a community in Alaska. The top of the line is their actual electric rate that commercial ratepayers would pay. The red, and then the green portion is the part that the state pays for this power cost equalization. The red part is the effective rate for homeowners for the first 500 kilowatt hours. Just a little bit of background, but it looks like actually rates aren't that expensive along this 20-cent line. However, that's only covers about 28% of the kilowatt hour sold statewide, I believe, in those PCE communities. So needless to say, it's a big state, costs are really expensive, and this Renewable Energy Fund that was established in 2008 has been really effective at getting renewable energy projects that work and are cost effective and that lower the cost of energy in these communities deployed and constructed effectively. So I have 3 slides here, just a little bit about the program, and I'm going pretty fast to try to save plenty of time at the end for questions. So as I mentioned, it's set up to support communities. The state, subsequent to setting up this fund, also set a goal of 50% renewable electricity statewide by 2025. So this program is also working to support that goal. Displaces the volatile price fossil fuels, and we're on the downside of that volatility right now, but man, the upside really hurts, and frankly a lot of the most of the Alaska communities had to buy their fuel in the fall or late summer before the prices came down, so they're still hurting even this winter on the price of fuel. Another thing that this program provides is a great vetting mechanism for energy projects. The legislature used to be hit all the time by concepts and ideas for renewable projects that local stakeholders had envisioned, and what this provides is a great way for the legislature to understand and have a good vetting mechanism for which projects are really going to be the most successful and which ones may not be. I have a bullet there about expanding the knowledge base. It really has been incredible how much Alaskans have learned in the last 7 or 8 years since this program has started. I think we've really dialed in what works and what doesn't. And we're still learning. It's definitely an ongoing process, but sometimes the first part of the learning curve is the steepest. Go to the next slide. So the program was established in 2008. The original goal for the program was $50 million a year in grants for 5 years. It was then extended for 10 more years in 2012, although that 50 million mark, it's been really more like 25 million in recent years, and now that oil prices are really low, it's been going down commensurate with that. Right now we have our list of recommendations for this year heading to the legislature next week. It's an annual application process. We put out a request for applications usually around July 1. Applications are due in the fall. They go through a pretty extensive economic and technical evaluation by AEA staff, economists, Department of Natural Resources, and others to come up with our recommendations at the end. So that's that vetting process I was talking about. And then ultimately, it's a recommendations program. What we do is we recommend to the legislature what projects we think merit funding, and ultimately the legislature has final say on what is funded. Now, they have been respectful of the list, and they've generally gone down the list, and it's more a matter of how much money can go to the projects that year as to how far down they draw the line. And typical in recent years, I mentioned, is 25 million. The first year was actually 100 million, so the average over the 7 years is more like 35. And the picture there is, I've got quite a few pictures sprinkled in just so you can see the diversity of projects, but that's an existing hydro, Blue Lake, in the Sitka area down in southeast Alaska that was expanded. It was, and it's now in operation. This was a picture taken, I think, last summer as they were in construction still, to bring the dam height up to store more water. So the program has a really strong public benefit focus. If you can't demonstrate very strong public benefits, then you're likely not going to have your project succeed. For example, we've seen some projects that would want to expand in renewables in order to serve, say, a mine or cruise ships or something like that, and those don't compete as well, or maybe ineligible. The strong emphasis also on high costs of energy areas, and a big important part of this is regional balance across the different regions of the state. Eligible applicants are utilities, IPPs, governments, tribal councils, and a couple of other small categories. So again, there's the public focus there you can see. And then eligible projects are basically what you think of as renewable projects plus a few things. For example, landfill gas, heat recovery. A lot of these diesel plants in rural Alaska and the villages have excess heat that can be used in buildings, and so that's an eligible use. And even for small communities only that might have no renewable energy but local gas, that's a potential. It's never been used, but that's a potential way to that could be funded. And transmission of renewables is also eligible to transmit from the renewable to a grid, or say extend a range. And then my last slide on the, oh, I'm sorry, that was my last one, on the basics of the program. Now I'll get into some statistics, and I've got some nice pictures. So in the first 7 years of applications, we've gotten about, over 700. We've now processed around 8, and so it's really right at the 800 mark is the number of applications we received. Funded is 277. We have about 122 active grants. And you can see the dollars, 1.4 billion has been requested. We've actually recommended only about 400 million, and appropriated from the legislature has been about 250 million. Just to give a sense of the volume, here's a map showing what types of projects are in what part of the state. I guess this shows me a couple things. One is the statewide distribution. Again, the core of the population lives in a couple of areas of the state, and then there are small bits of population scattered all around. So you can see the rural aspect is really strongly emphasized here. The other thing you can see is where the resources are. The wind along the west coast. There's hydro wherever there's topography and good rain in south central Alaska and southeast, including Kodiak that we'll be talking about where my pointer's pointing. And then wherever there are trees or pretty good biomass systems in the interior and then southeast. So Alaska has amazing renewable energy resources and a bunch of them that we can't really tap economically yet too. For round 8, the projects that we're recommending at this point are depicted here. So again, a strong regional spread, but these still have to go through the legislature. As far as we measure everything in terms of diesel gallons equivalent saved. An awful lot of this actually is diesel savings, but some of it that would be on the rail belt, kind of in the urban areas here in Anchorage, might be displacing natural gas. In the interior might be naphtha or something similar, a little bit of coal. So you can see the early years, it took some time as projects went through earlier phases, reconnaissance and feasibility, and then some of the construction projects actually got constructed. And in 2013, we finally hit the ground running and had a major set of projects started and producing power that year, power or heat, I should say. The 2014 number is still just projected here, and we'll be having that number finalized within the next week or so. But I think we're still pretty well on track for some good growth. Let me do it. And I've got to wrap up quickly here to give Darren some time. I've got a couple more to go through. So this is just overall net present value. The capital costs that have gone into it is about $300 million, $315 I think. But the state funds that support this is only a fraction of it. It's less than $100 million. And then the rest of it is other capital that came in to support those projects. And then the benefits are just huge. So a benefit cost ratio total program wide of 2.8. If you look at it just as far as the state's investment, is probably more like 8 or 9 or somewhere in that range. Oops, I think I skipped one. Let me go back. And I've got 3 pie charts here just so you can see about how it's spread. So here's by project. So hydro and wind are the 2 where the most dollars have gone to. The numbers on the side are the number of projects as opposed to the dollars. And then there are a lot of heat projects now. Heat recovery and biomass are also really big, but they're generally small projects. We're talking building scale or a set of building rather than a whole community. The next pie is projects by phase. Again, a little bit in reconnaissance, fair bit in feasibility, design, and then the bigger dollars go into construction, of course. We have a goal of 80-20, 80% design and construction, 20 in the earlier phases. And then here's our regional distribution. You can see how important regional distribution is to us, although this has happened fairly naturally. So these are the dollars per region. What we're going to be getting into next is Kodiak's little wedge up here, and they've done some amazing things, and Darren will be telling us about that in just a minute. And I think next I've just got some pictures, so I'll go really quickly through these. Juneau Airport ground source heat pump. If you ever fly through Juneau, the building's heated by a big field under the tarmac. Here's Unalaska Wind, small community. They've got a nice wind resource there. A small hydro that serves Cordova. Biomass has really been up and coming. There's a big people factor here, and the schools, a lot of the schools have now gotten into curriculum to support greenhouses, so the students have small businesses with greenhouses. It's really hard to get good fresh veggies into these places, and so just some huge successes there around biomass and particularly the greenhouse twist. We've done some exploration for geothermal. That's a really challenging one. And then here's Fire Island Wind. This is just off Anchorage, where I am today, where I live. And just a final slide, just the impacts. So as I mentioned before, the adoption rates for renewables have really skyrocketed, I think, because of this program. The investment in the early stage projects has really helped leverage private investment for the construction phase, and I think that's going to continue. lowering costs, helping communities become more sustainable and stable. And I think for the sake of time, I'm going to leave it at that and thank you. Next, we'll jump into Darren Scott, who's going to tell us about a set of projects that happened in Kodiak. So if you're on there, Darren, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Okay, appreciate it, Sean. Yeah, I'm going to talk about Kodiak Electric and really in partnership with Alaska Energy Authority and been very successful on what we've done here, and multiple projects have been funded by the Renewable Energy Fund, and I really want to appreciate Sean and all their staff's help through the process. Let me get going here. Okay, first a little bit about Kodiak. Again, Sean pointed on the map where we are. A little bit about our community. We're primarily focused as a fishing port. We're one of the nation's largest fishing ports, and we also have the nation's largest Coast Guard base. So between those two areas, that's about 60% of our electrical load. We're also a very large island, and being an island, we're not connected to anybody electrically. So everything we do, we're running an island electrical grid, and for the engineers out there, that brings extra challenges when you're adding variable renewable power like wind. And also, just to plug for our other resident, we have the world's largest bears on our island as well. There's about 3,000 of them, and very, very interesting animals. So we're an electric cooperative, so we're owned by our members in our community, and you can see some of the stats there. We're not huge. We've got about a 28 megawatt system, and we've got about 30 megawatts now of hydro, 9 megawatts of wind, and that all interplays in our system with, again, peak load about 28 megawatts, minimum load about 11 megawatts on our system. So years ago, our board of directors, again, from our community, set out a vision to be basically remove diesel from our system as being a large player. So be 95% renewable by the year 2020. We've actually made that goal now. I'll be talking that in more detail here in the near future. But that's been our driving influence for many years here at KEA. And it was great timing to interface with the Renewable Energy Fund, because the state of Alaska at the same time was really having some of those similar type goals. It was great to be able to work together with the organization to help us achieve our goals here in our town. So some of the projects we've gotten through, we've done 4 projects basically with the Renewable Energy Fund in the state of Alaska. So we did 2 different wind projects, or basically the same wind project, but came in stages due to some of the grid interactions we had to work through. We put 3 wind turbines on our Pillar Mountain site to start with, 4.5 megawatts in 2009, another 3 more in 2012, and at the same time we added those 3 more. In 2012, we added a 3 megawatt battery energy storage system to help our grid accommodate all that variable renewable energy. And then finally, to kind of cap it all off, we expanded our hydro project and added 10 more megawatts of hydro capacity to kind of glue everything together and make it all work well. And all these projects, again, have been in concert with the Renewable Energy Fund. Pretty much rounds 1 through round 5, we all had kind of pieces of that going through. And it really helped KEA be successful, because without that fund, we could not have done it near this fast. These have been very cost-effective projects for our community, but without the help and the support of the financing, it would have been too hard on our balance sheet to do all this quickly. So just some of the stats from the phases of the project. We made just shy of 50 million kilowatt hours on what we call Pillar Mountain Phase 1, which is the first 3 wind turbines you see up on the hill there. And again, with the success of that project, that led us to adding to that site in 2012. So there's the whole set of turbines there. You see our part of our fishing fleet as well. So another 50 million kilowatt hours. It happened from 2013 on, and that's been very good for our community. This just kind of gets into the engineering side of things, but it's a little more impressive picture than just the set of batteries. This represents our energy storage system. But what this shows, not to go into a bunch of details unless folks are interested with questions later, how everything works and bridges together. All these charts kind of reflect either frequency or our wind, hydro, and our battery system all working together to keep the lights on when wind decides to take a left turn and go away. So it's just a simulation of that, but it actually did a test in the field, and this is the results from the test. But through the whole process, through working with the Renewable Energy Fund and the engineers up there, there's quite a bit of engineering support also, the Alaska Energy Authority, through their vetting process. They have a good engineering team there and ask a lot of good questions. These are some of the results from some of those questions, how everything interplays together to keep the lights on an isolated grid. And then finally, this is the result of a third hydro turbine we put at our existing hydro plant, and that capped it all off to allow us to move to basically 100% renewable generation. So in 2014, these are the actual stats now that we had. We were 99.7% renewable between hydro and wind, and just a little bit of diesel. Most of the reason we run the diesel is just to make sure they're there if we need them. So you got to test start them every few months. And other than that, we've been renewable, and that's been a great thing for our town in a lot of different ways. So some of the things it's done for us, saved us almost 7 million gallons of diesel since this project has started. You know, we run about, on average, now again prices are dropping right now, but on average it's been about $3.50 a gallon for us out in Kodiak. So you're looking at, you know, $23–24 million in fuel savings along the way. Tons and tons of pollution have been saved as well. And it's, you know, it's great from a local community standpoint, a cooperative standpoint, to be able to. This isn't world changing itself, but it's something we can do locally to help the world environment and you know, act locally type of approach. Also, what it's done for us economically has been great. This is just an example from a residential rate. If you purchased 600 kilowatt hours back in 2001, you would have spent $105 on your electric bill. No inflation, none of those kind of numbers built into this. This is all just real numbers right now. This January, if you purchased 600 kilowatt hours as a residential rate, you'd have spent just under $103. So 2.5% lower than it was 14 years ago. Has been a great thing for our town, and we're starting to see extra benefits from that now. This has been the same thing for our large power rates as well, and we are going through some economic boom from that. We've got again, I told you that fishing and fish processing is a major portion of our economy. We've got 8 processors on the island, 8 large fish processors. One of them is making a major expansion, and so we're going to be getting about a 12% increase in our production capacity here on the island, which is a major expansion for one of the processors, and some of the other processors are starting to look at that as well. So we're excited about what that's going to bring to the town, and a big piece of it has been stable, you know, lower cost electricity. And one of the great things about it, again, oil prices are down right now, but they'll turn sometime. This fixed price cost is going to go on for many years for KEA because renewable costs are fixed. We got some future projects we're looking as well to continue, and the Renewable Energy Fund hopefully will continue out in the future as well because it's been very successful. We're looking at expanding and adding more hydro or water to our hydro plant. That's a picture of our lake right now we've got up in the mountains in Alaska, and it's great to see that at least currently the state legislators have looked at having the foresight to keep this program going out in the future. Again, there's financial issues in the state right now, but hopefully that program continues because we'd like to continue to use it because we've been very successful, and it's been a very successful partnership with the Alaska Energy Authority, and it's been great for our town, cost for our members and the price of power, and now economic development as well. So appreciate the time, and again, that's always in our presentation on the vision statement because that's always where we like to head. So I'll turn it back to y'all, and again, I want to thank Sean and the whole Alaska Energy Authority for all the support they've given us over these last many years.
Okay, thanks very much to Sean and Darren. We're going to turn now to our speakers from Oregon. I just want to remind everybody that we will address questions at the end of this second presentation. We did receive some questions on the Alaska program, and we will presumably receive some on the Oregon program as well. We'll do our best to split our time evenly between the two when it comes to addressing questions. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and send them in, but type them in now. Don't wait till the end. That way I can kind of get a sense of how many there are and divide them up and organize them a bit. Okay, so I would like to now turn it over to Dave Muldahl and Alan Johnston to discuss the Energy Trust of Oregon's program and the wastewater treatment plant program in the city of Gresham.
Thank you, Todd. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound good.
Great, thank you. First, thanks to CESA. I really appreciate this webinar series and appreciate you spotlighting the impressive efforts by the city of Gresham and their road to net zero. Again, my name is Dave Muldahl. I'm a renewable energy project manager for Energy Trust of Oregon. I'm going to spend just a few slides, move through very quickly, talking about how we do our work in Oregon to incentivize energy efficiency and renewable energy generation, and then leave most of our time to the real energy champion at the city of Gresham, Alan Johnston, to go into the weeds on and their 10-year impressive journey to net zero. A little bit about the Energy Trust of Oregon for the listeners. We're an independent nonprofit organization, 501c3. We serve about 1.5 million customers of the investor-owned utilities on the electric and natural gas side. That's on the electric side, that's Portland General Electric and Pacific Power, and on the natural gas side, that's Northwest Natural and Cascade Natural Gas. So we invest ratepayers' funds to provide access to affordable energy, energy efficiency measures, and renewable energy generation. We invest in generating homegrown renewable power, and in doing so, we build a stronger Oregon and Southwest Washington. So our overall purpose is really to administer a stable, dedicated funding to provide comprehensive energy efficiency and renewable energy solutions to all customers. We believe that the cheapest kilowatt hour is the kilowatt hour we don't have to generate initially, and we work to lower the above market costs for renewable energy projects, which you'll hear about here in a minute concerning the city of Gresham. And in doing so, we transform markets to higher efficiency products and practices. Oregon is a respectively large state. This map shows in the colored areas the service territories of the investor-owned utilities. Most of the state in white are served by cooperatives, municipals, and public utility districts. Those are areas in which we can't do our work. But the public purpose charge is imposed on, again, the 4 investor-owned utilities, kind of in the northwest corner of the state. The green color is the Portland General Electric service territory. The mustard or yellow is Pacific Power. And then the blue hashed color is Cascade Natural Gas. And then the red hashed, largely in the northwest corner of the state, is Northwest Natural. So what is it that we provide through the Energy Trust? Really, it comes down to information, expertise, and dollars. First, information through program delivery contractors, program management contractors. We provide information on how commercial, industrial, residential customers, agricultural customers can save energy and use renewable energy in their home and businesses. Also expertise, kind of drilling down to renewable energy. For example, if an entity was proposing a renewable energy project, we'll help them cost share the cost of a consultant to do, for example, a feasibility study or a design study or any analysis that's required to determine whether or not that project is viable. And then third, of course, incentives. We provide dollars for energy efficiency and renewable energy development. So what has this amounted to in the last 12 to 13 years? Really, we've foregone the need to build an entirely a large coal-burning baseload power plant. We've saved almost 30 million, actually over 30 million annual therms at this point, about 110 average megawatts generated, enough energy to power about 500,000 homes, and importantly, we avoided almost 10 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions. So now getting back to Biopower, again, I manage the Biopower portfolio for the state, And where are these projects? How do we think about biopower, in particular biogas energy projects resulting from the anaerobic digestion of a variety of organic feedstocks? Well, we think about it as extracting energy from waste streams as part of a larger process to improve practices in waste management. So where are these projects? In Pacific Power and Portland General Electric service territories, today there are 20 wastewater treatment plants that are producing biogas. Of those 20 plants, 9 are generating electricity using biogas and generating electricity for via cogeneration, capturing the heat, thermal energy, and electricity, net metering that power on site. Almost all of those 20 plants have the opportunity to generate more electricity from biogas or install cogeneration for the first time. So that's a great opportunity for expanding this market. Also, agricultural operations, CAFOs, dairies that produce substantial volumes of dairy manure. We have quite a fleet of operating dairy digesters in the state. There's an expanding interest in Oregon right now to look at biopower, biogas energy generation at breweries, which also may include some type of water reuse component. And of course, post-consumer food waste. The picture at the bottom of the slide is the JC biomethane plant, which was under construction largely during 2013 and is now operating. The first merchant biogas plant in the state of Oregon, actually in the Pacific Northwest, and it digests primarily post-commercial food waste from the city of Portland. So what have we invested in the last 10 years? Well, we invested funds on the biogas energy side at 5 wastewater treatment plants, generating now about 36,000 megawatt hours per year, 3 digesters at dairies throughout the state. And this doesn't include all the dairy digesters. Some of them, as I mentioned in that map earlier, are located not within our service territory. And then also food waste digesters. We have a project at Stallbush Island Farms that we supported, and again, the JC biomethane project. So a good history of success in biogas energy projects. How do we incentivize these projects? Well, importantly, we provide funds to project applicants through project development assistance. And these are non-capital costs expenditures. We cost share usually 50% of non-capital cost related analysis like design studies, feasibility studies, permitting studies, interconnection studies, any analysis that's needed to determine whether or not a project is viable or not. Early stage capital is very important for all these projects. And then secondly, we provide incentives up to the 100% of the above market costs for the renewable energy resource. Where's the opportunities moving forward? Well, it's a challenging market. We have very low avoided power, wholesale power prices in the Pacific Northwest. As everyone's experiencing, dwindling state and federal tax incentives are playing a big role. And in Oregon, we're seeing a growing competition for biogas to be used for transportation fuel, which is good, but it certainly declines the ability to expand the biogas to electricity market. So our focus right now, given our very low power prices here, wholesale power prices, is really projects that can net meter that energy on site. Again, wastewater treatment plants, as you'll hear from Alan in a minute, is a great opportunity to expand biogas energy in the state of Oregon. We're also working, the Energy Trust is working to lower O&M costs related to these facilities and helping existing projects optimize generation. And importantly, that's a picture on the screen of actually fats, oils, and greases clogging a receiving system for a wastewater plant. We're identifying sources of co-digestible feedstocks, and those are fats, oils, and greases and other food processing wastes that can be used not only to increase biogas at facilities, but greatly increase revenue streams through tipping fees. So now back to Gresham, their journey to wastewater treatment plant. We've supported the city of Gresham for the last 10 years. The first cogen they installed, actually their cogen project they installed in 2005 was the Energy Trust's first biopower project. We've provided them a variety of project development assistance, incentives for energy efficiency measures, which have been very, very important on their journey, and most recently, an incentive for their fog receiving station phase 2 and cogen expansion. And lastly, if you want to read more about this project and a few others in the state of Oregon, I draw your attention to a case study that we just recently published called Putting Waste to Work in Oregon. May be found on our website at this address. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to the real energy champion, Alan Johnston.
Hey, thanks, Dave, and thanks to CESA and the Energy Trust for inviting me here today. I'm going to be talking and giving an update on the Gresham Wastewater Treatment Plant Energy Net Zero Journey. Just a quick summary of where Gresham's at. It's kind of a medium-sized city just outside of the city of Portland, Oregon. We share a border with Washington that you can see at the top there. That's the Columbia River. We have a service population of about 114,000 people. We have a 20 MGD plant, secondary activated sludge anaerobic digestion, and we have about 20 FTEs here on site. This is a little bit of a busy slide, but these are all the key things that we see got us to where we're at today. These are kind of our energy net zero milestones. The brownish ones you see here are, what we feel are the important studies that we did. Just about all of these involve the Energy Trust in some fashion. I'm going to just try to quickly talk about most of these here in this presentation. So as Dave mentioned, really our first project with the Energy Trust was back in 2005 when we installed a 400 kilowatt cogenerator with combined heat and power. So we also use the Wastewater to heat all our digesters. That project also installed a biogas treatment system that removes H2S and siloxanes from the biogas. So a little bit about the history of its operation. This is the 10th year since we put that in, but we've had a pretty good record of running that cogenerator. We have about a 93% runtime since then. Like I said, it produces power and heats the buildings, 72,000 plus operating hours, lots of kilowatt hours we produced. An important thing is that we found it costs us about 2.6 cents per kilowatt hour, something to think about when you're doing projects like this. They are relatively complex systems that require some maintenance. But again, it's about a third of the utility rate, including demand charges and other things. It has produced about 50% of the treatment plant's power during that time, and we save about $250,000 in annual avoided costs, and it had about a 3.5-year payback. One of the other milestones was in 2008 when we partnered with the Oregon Association of Clean Water Agencies and the Energy Trust of Oregon and Kennedy Jenks to do a study on energy independence for treatment plants. That study had a couple kind of general recommendations that we took to heart and have been doing since. Obviously, the first is to do those energy efficiency projects first. I'll talk a little bit about some of the big ones that we've done. And secondly, that the best resource option is an IC or internal combustion engine, and that they're the most cost-effective way to do that, and also to investigate a fog and green waste program, which I'll talk a little bit about also. Right about that time, 2008, 2009, the city of Gresham also put together sustainability policy that we see here that really helped guide us where we're at today and gave us council support and management support as we tried to do these projects. Another key thing followed up in 2009 is we completed a feasibility study for digester fog injection in our digesters. That was a grant-funded project through the state of Oregon. That feasibility study really kind of paved the way for where we're at. Some of the study highlights, it was a $40,000 grant. Adding fog receiving facilities is economically viable, big part of that study that led us to where we're at. And that there is a market for this service in our area. That is, there's people that want to bring us fog in our area, and that we could add an additional 400 kilowatt cogenerator. We needed to get a fog tipping fee of at least 3 cents. We are now getting 8 cents a gallon for that. And that we needed to get 7,000 to 11,000 gallons a day of fog. I think we're averaging 10 to 12 right now. And then some estimated costs in that study that ended up being real close to the actual. Another key milestone in 2010 is we put together our first formal energy management plan and energy management team. We've been meeting every month with that team since then. It really kind of helps keep you on track. We selected energy team members from management, ops, engineering, and maintenance. We meet monthly for an hour and talk only energy. We update and review our energy production and consumption projects. The team selects and evaluates projects to do, and we try to keep running agendas and update the plan monthly. And really the first project after the cogen project was this. We installed a 420 kilowatt solar system here. It provides about I think right around 7% of the plant's consumption needs here. It's on just over an acre. It's ground mounted. We did a power purchase agreement with Sun Edison. They paid for and installed it, and then there was no capital cost to the city. And then the kilowatt charge is 2/3 the local utility rate. So we'd save about 1/3 of utility costs on this project for the next 20 years. The next key driver, which I think is important for us, is in our 2011 master plan, we actually had a chapter called Energy Independence Alternatives. And so it put numbers and dollars down in capital improvement projects and identified the things that we need to do to get there, and then also calculated whether they made financial sense. That is, whether they had a reasonable payback. And at that time they did, and this is when we started putting all these projects in the budget. So the first one was our fats, oils, and grease receiving station. What we called phase 1 in 2012 was a 10,000 gallon fog receiving tank. We had a fog grinder, fog unload tank, mixing pump. I think you can see my mouse. That's the actual grinder. It gets unloaded over here, goes through a grinder, through a heat exchanger, and into the tank. And we heat it to 110 degrees and then slowly inject it into our digesters. A little bit of information about it. We had limited capacity, so we couldn't just open the door to customers. We had to limit the amount of people that could actually come in and discharge. So we advertised for fog haulers. 3 fog haulers were contracted, and they still are today. They did about 7,500 gallons a day during that phase 1. We got 8 cents a gallon, about $250,000 a year in revenues, and it's been going for 2 years now. In 2012, on the efficiency side, we did 2 large projects that the Energy Trust was intimately involved in. We replaced our gas mixing system with linear motion mixers. We replaced 2 of our older style Hoffman multi-stage blowers with Neuros blowers, and replaced all our diffusers with fine bubble diffusers in our aeration basins. And here's just a couple pictures of the Neuros blowers in the top, and then linear motion mixer on each of our 2 digesters on the right there. So after that, we followed up with what we called our phase 2A, and that's to expand our fats, oils, and grease receiving station. As you can see now, there is a second 20,000 gallon tank next to that first 10,000 gallon tank. So we now have 30,000 gallons of total capacity that began, I think it started right around April 2014. So this just kind of shows what all this fog does here. The red line was our average biogas production prior to fog. We were right around 180,000 cubic feet a day. The blue line kind of shows it through phase 1 and starting phase 2. And you can see we've pretty much almost doubled our biogas production. So the very last phase is what we're trying to do. We call phase 2B. It's to add a 400 kilowatt cogeneration expansion here. We are at about 90% design on that project, maybe even a little more than that. We actually, ironically, started that engine up and put it on the grid for the first time today. And we're still in testing mode, but I think in the next month it'll probably be full-time generation. About a $2 million construction project. $1.4 million of the phase 2A and 2B projects were in grants. We expect really, hopefully here by the end of January to have it going. I threw this up here just to summarize all the grants over the last 10 years. And the common partner has been the Energy Trust. You know, they've really helped us through all these projects, through the feasibility studies and then also construction grants. The state of Oregon has also helped through what used to be the Business Energy Tax Credit Program, and they now have a new incentives program. And it's a little busy, but the number in the bottom, the 38.6%, that's the percent of grants on all these projects throughout the years. It's pretty significant. So what does that all mean? How much energy are we producing and consuming? And this chart kind of shows it since 2005 with the installation of Cogen 1. The yellow part is our cogen production portion of our consumption, and then the blue is how much of our consumption has been solar. And as you can see through our energy efficiency projects, we've gone from 6.2 million kilowatt hours a year to 5.2 million kilowatt hours, and then the red part's the part we buy from the utility, and hopefully Cogen 2 will consume all that, and we'll be net zero here in the next few weeks. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to Dave and Alan from Oregon. We do have a bunch of questions that have come in. I have to say most of them so far are for the Alaska folks. That's probably because they went first and people have had a little more time to type those questions in. So if you have been listening and you're interested in the Oregon program that was just presented and you had questions, go ahead and send them in, and we will do our best to get to them. So if everybody's ready to go, we will start with some questions on the Alaska program, and we'll probably go a little bit past our allotted hour here to get to some of these. So a couple of simple ones to start out. What's the source of the funding for the Alaska program?
Hi, this is Sean. The source is typically capital funds from the legislature, from the state government, and the source of that is generally oil revenues, which is how the state runs.
Okay, great. Then we have a couple of questions about the battery used on Kodiak. What type of battery technology is used and size, and then what ancillary services are provided, if any?
All right. It's actually, we run two battery systems in parallel. They're both 1.5 megawatt, 1 megawatt hour advanced lead acid batteries. They're the old Extreme. Extreme Power has now changed hands and bought by a German outfit called Unicus. But and the reason we use those is just to the short burst that we need from them. We don't, with our hydro plant, we really need just about a minute to a minute and a half of capacity out of the batteries, so the hydro plant has time to catch up. So it becomes just a very short bridge. As far as ancillary services, we do get some voltage and stuff from it at times, but we primarily keep it there mainly for frequency support, kind of set on a droop function if you need that kind of detail.
Okay. And then another question on the battery system for the Pilar Mountain Wind Farm. Was it a large cost for the project, and was it difficult to install?
No, it wasn't overly difficult to install. It did run, we were probably at about a little over $4 million all set in on the battery system to get it installed, but it wasn't overly difficult to install. The integration portion definitely takes some thought of how you want to get it all programmed in and what exactly you want to do with it. That was probably the most difficult portion of that, because you've got to, it's a really kind of tricky situation to get everything balanced in on an isolated grid, and that goes back into what type of particular technology you pick as well for your batteries. And the batteries are also changing so much as we speak. This is back, we were purchasing this almost 4 years ago now, so that was about the best thing on the market for this type of integration timing that we had.
Okay. I wanted to ask a question of the folks from Oregon with this this project. Seems like there would be a lot of opportunities for replicating such a project, since the wastewater treatment is so obviously pretty ubiquitous. I mean, every city and town has such a facility pretty much. But looking more at the project specifics, is it replicable, and if so, is there a thought about doing that, or how would you approach sort of broadening this out to a program that would be applicable to a bunch of different facilities across the state?
This is Dave from the Energy Trust. There's a variety of ways to answer that. The first and foremost, kind of this energy generation idea is really, and I'm sure Alan will expound on this, it's really kind of outside of the traditional core responsibility of the wastewater treatment plant. So the concept of generating electricity through solar or cogeneration, and then of course the added complexities of adding a fog receiving station and administering the billing, testing the market, build it and they will come, some faith in that decision making. It can be challenging, and especially challenging for the smaller wastewater treatment plants. Cogeneration, kind of the conventional wisdom, has really, at least traditionally, been only viable for wastewater plants that treat more than about 10 million gallons of water per day. Now that's no longer the case. We're seeing cogeneration projects operating very successfully at much smaller wastewater treatment plants. Now shifting from cogen to fog and high-strength organic waste, I mean, one of the keys to expanding this concept to other wastewater treatment plants in Oregon and elsewhere is to prove up that feedstock. How much is out there? What's it going to look like in terms of a tipping fee to the municipality? There has to be high level of confidence in those numbers before decision makers will pull the trigger and make the decision to move forward. These are expensive facilities, but we're confident at the Energy Trust that there's more than enough feedstock out there. A lot of that material is being landfilled, and there's tremendous opportunities for it to be recovered and turned into renewable energy at wastewater treatment plants. Alan, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd agree, Dave. I think any treatment plant that has anaerobic digestion should look into the studies and things that we've done. I think it's a very common treatment technology out there at lots of plants our size and larger. Like Dave said, a lot of the smaller plants, might have a tough time doing that. But it's important that you do the study, that you look at the numbers, crunch those numbers, look in your local area, identify sources of fats, oils, and grease. One thing we have found is we don't begin to take it all. Like I said, we only have 3 haulers. We could have hired 6 or 8, and they all want to bring it here. We get calls a lot to try to come bring product here. It's not just fats, oils, and grease from restaurants. It's also manufacturing waste, organic waste from all sorts of things, milk production, and all sorts of stuff. So there's lots of lots of stuff out there, and I suggest going and looking for it.
Well, that brings up an interesting question. There's increasingly competition for these waste products, or at least products that were for a long time considered waste, but are now in demand in some areas for biodiesel, for example, for transportation. Did ETO, look at or make any? Was there any kind of decision making about, what's the highest use for oils, and also are you seeing competition for those products? For different applications.
There is some competition for the products. No, we didn't look at it per se. Yellow grease, or let's say fat fryer waste grease from restaurants, is largely diverted, which we know already, to the manufacture of liquid biodiesel fuels and such. That material has a high energy content. It could be digested at a wastewater treatment plant or a merchant biogas facility, but because of the higher energy content, the relative purity of the product, most of that material today is being delivered to the manufacturer of biodiesel facility. As Alan mentioned, there's just a lot more of this material out there, this material being food processing waste and fats, oils, and greases, than we really even are beginning to divert and recover. There just hasn't been a lot of work to characterize where this material, how much is out there, where is it going, what are the economics related therein. So we're very confident at the Trust that there's more than enough fats, oils, and greases and related high-strength organic waste to serve as very valuable biogas energy feedstocks at wastewater treatment plants. And a lot of this material is also capable of being converted to biogas at dairy digesters, at merchant biogas facilities, at any anaerobic digester. For example, larger breweries can not only digest their high-strength organic waste, which are largely spent yeast and other grains from their facility, but also be designed to take in, say, high-strength organic waste from other smaller breweries. So I think the sky's the limit, and the takeaway is there's a lot of material out there. It just isn't being put to best use today.
Okay. From having looked a bit at biomass of different kinds, my recollection is that for woody biomass, for example, typically, a radius of about 50 miles from the plant is about as far as you want to haul it, because of course you have to balance the energy content with the cost and energy use of haulage. What's the radius, for fats and do you have a sort of a sense of energy content versus haulage and processing?
Alan, you want to comment on that? I've got a few thoughts if you want to add anything about that.
I don't know exactly how many miles, but I know that some of our haulers come from really all across the state. Some of them do loops around to key areas. Yakima, which might be a few hundred miles from here, and even parts of central and eastern Oregon that they come through. Kind of depends on the hauler. Most of it is local, I'd say within that 50-mile range, but there is some that come from farther than that.
And we've heard anecdotally the same. We haven't done a direct study of that, but we hear of material flowing all throughout Oregon and up and down the I-5 corridor. What it really comes down to is what's the alternative for the waste collector hauler? Can that material be disposed of, and can their profit be higher if it's taken to a convenient wastewater treatment plant or dairy digester or other anaerobic digester, or are they better off landfilling it? And we would prefer the former, of course. So I don't think there's as clear of a rule of thumb, say 30 miles or 60-mile radius, like there is in the woody biomass, bioenergy world, as there is for fog and other co-digestible feedstocks.
Okay, thank you. We are going a little bit past the hour. I hope that's okay. I know Darren Scott does need to take off, but I think our other three speakers are going to be able to stay for a few minutes. We're going to get to a few more questions, do our best to get to as many as we can. Going back to Alaska for a moment, given that you've got a large amount of wind capacity on a small system, how is the system frequency maintained? Does the hydro provide frequency response, or is that what the battery's doing?
I guess you could say it's really a combination of both. If we get a large frequency excursion, say we've got 18 megawatts in our system, 9 megawatts of wind, so 50% penetration at the time, which is fairly high, and then that 9 megawatts goes to 2 or 3 in a matter of seconds. The way the system will work, it's kind of like that graph I had up there that was a little complicated. The batteries will inject quickly in a kind of microsecond type time frame, and they'll inject up to 3 megawatts if it's needed. And in that scenario, at the same time, the hydro will start to respond. It can respond with a megawatt or so fairly quickly, but then to get that full additional 3 megawatts, it'll take over about an 80-second window of time to respond. So they really work hand in hand, but that initial few microseconds to seconds to up to about 80 seconds is really what the battery's there for, to provide that bridge.
Okay, and I think this is a question for Sean Scaling from Alaska Energy Authority. The question is, with such high rates, why are taxpayer funds needed for these types of programs? Why not set up a financing mechanism for low-interest loans and invite private sector investing?
That's a great question. I think the way I view it is the state both has historically good revenue to the state from the oil industry, but at the same time, Alaskans pay just huge dollars for for their energy, especially in rural Alaska, which is odd, isn't it? You'd think an oil-producing state you'd have cheap fuel costs, but frankly, most of it comes from refineries on the west coast and has to come all the way up here and then go upriver and sometimes even be flown into communities. So I think one answer is just, historically there's been, the state has, when it has money, been supportive of lowering cost of energy across the state, but especially in rural areas where it tends to be higher. The second answer is rural Alaska is complicated and expensive. Very, very small communities. I mean, some of them are just 100 people or something. Remote. You have to fly in or come in on a boat. And so while I think some of the more urban, rural areas like Kodiak that we've been talking about, I think investors may be interested in that. If you're talking about the complexity of operating in rural Alaska, it's really relatively small projects. While the expenses are, the energy cost expenses that you're competing with are high, the construction costs are also really high. So, it's something that we try to explore more and more. But as long as the state grant money has been there, that's been a great way to get things going really rapidly. Now that we're looking at lower income and a huge budget deficit in the state, things could get a little bit more tricky over the meantime, but there is a big state savings account as well that will be certainly tapped this year. So I don't know, that might help some, but we're definitely interested in exploring that more, and I think there are some places of the state that where it's more palatable. Generally, the more urban-like centers might be more appealing to investors, but if you know of investment opportunities, we're definitely looking to shift to that wherever we can as well.
Okay. Well, we've gone to 3:10, and I think that's probably about as late as we can push this. I want to thank our speakers, Sean Scaling from Alaska Energy Authority, Darren Scott from Kodiak Electric Association, and Dave Moldall from Energy Trust of Oregon and Alan Johnston from the City of Gresham, Oregon. Congratulations on your SLICE awards for these projects. They really are exceptional, and we hope that this webinar has been helpful for anybody from other states or municipalities that are looking into this kind of advanced clean energy project. Samantha, do you want to announce any upcoming webinars before we close this out?
Sure, Todd. We have a few upcoming webinars. We have one next Friday as part of our Resilient Power project. It's on new initiatives in community resilient power. And a few other webinars coming up. The details on those are on our website at CESA.org/webinars.
Okay, and thanks again, everybody. As we said before, this has been recorded and it will be archived. You can see on the screen right now our our website URL at the bottom of the slide there. Feel free to review the webinar, forward the link to others, and so forth. Thanks very much, and we hope to see you on the next webinar. Bye-bye.